Good afternoon, welcome to another A-Push video with Mr. Paid for Barlow High School. Today we're looking at early colonial angst. In the period we're talking about is 1650 to 1763. We have two essential questions today that we're going to look at. These are, A, what was the purpose of the British colonies? Like, why did these colonies exist? And B, why did the colonists come to resent the British? Hopefully we can explain both of those as we go through this. So the first question, what was the purpose of the colonies? The purpose economically was something called mercantilism. This may be something as you read in your book, you're going, I don't understand what mercantilism is. Let me explain. Mercantilism is an economic theory that basically the mother country would found colonies, and the purpose of the colonies was to basically support economically the mother country. The mother country should be having, at the end of the day, gold, hard currency, push toward it to enrich it, to basically help it have more money for founding more empires, gaining more territory, just gaining national wealth, enriching its local population, fighting wars, whatever. Okay, so the idea is raw materials are going to leave the colonies and they're going to go to the mother country. Manufactured goods are going to come back. So let me explain kind of how this works. So you're going to have raw materials leaving New England, things like furs. You're going to have things like lumber. You're going to have whale oil and other products that are going to leave from New England and eventually rum. These things are going to leave New England and they're going to be, these mainly raw materials are going to go to New England, go to the British Isles, and Great Britain is going to hire their workers in factories. Remember, there's no factories at this time in North America. They will then produce those things into manufactured goods, which they'll turn around and sell to the colonies. So the colonies provide resources to be harvested and processed, and then there's also a market to buy those. So you not only have the population of your country, but the population of your colonies. And let's not forget, we're going to have lots of colonies for the British, okay? That these are all going to be ways to gain wealth for the British Empire. From the southern colonies, you have tobacco. You have indigo dye was a very big deal. It's kind of a bluish dye. You have rice. So they have foodstuffs. You have other products. Whale oil may not sound like a big deal to you. Whaling was huge until they can basically separate petroleum oil and get different sources of oil all the way through the 1800s. Well, the first two-thirds of the 1800s, you're going to see whale oil until about the 1870s and 80s. Being a very big factor even in the United States after its inception. So you can imagine that in the 1600s and early 1700s, whale oil is basically the fuel to have lights run, okay? It's a big, big deal. Again, manufactured goods will come back to the south of a variety of shapes and sizes and just different things. Also, you're going to see the same thing with the West Indies. The West Indies are going to send molasses and sugar. That will be raw materials going, and they'll get back manufactured goods. So different British colonies, this should be red around it, sorry about that, as well as the East Coast. And you can see a diversity of products produced. They want that diversity. All these things going there to help their population, feed their population, and give their population work to do to raise their standard of living. And more gold coming back to more companies, more rich people paying more taxes. The government is enriched as well. That's mercantilism. Now, how are you going to enforce this? Because this system only works if you trade exclusively with Great Britain. If the colonists decide to trade with like the French or one of their colonies or the Spanish or Portuguese or the Dutch, anyone else in Western Europe, let's say, even trade with New France out here in kind of the Ohio River Valley and up into Canada of today, well, that's going to undermine this whole system. You need those products going there. So the British are going to come up with something called the Navigation Acts, and there are several of these, but the first one's going to be 1650. This is basically saying, you may only trade with us. If you're going to trade with someone else that we approve, you have to pay a tax to us. Now, the colonists aren't going to like this because this is crimping their style. And just to explain, let's say that you have a business and you want to sell a product. But the law says you can only sell the product in your city or county, whatever that is. Okay, now for some of you watching this, you might live in a very large city or county like Los Angeles County or something like that in LA, and have millions of people there. Others of you might be in a very rural area and have a few, 10,000 people in your county. But let's say you want to sell nationwide or worldwide or even statewide, and you can only sell to this fraction. Are you going to get as much money? No. Is demand going to be as high? No. Can you produce as much and sell it? No. So this is crimping your style. These markets are producing things, and we're of course more focused here and when we become the United States, they're going to be bitter. And so smuggling starts to develop. Now, these laws are put into place, and enough people were trading with the British, they're making lots of money. So what settles in the late 1600s is this thing called salutary neglect. In Europe, they call it benign neglect. And essentially, this is the idea that, it was going well enough. The British, they just had other things going on. They had rivalry and war and everything with the French and jostling in Europe for supremacy. They just didn't care because they were making money, so they didn't enforce this really well. Now, if you think about that in your own experience, that would be like you having parents that never, ever enforced any rules in your house. They made rules. You be home for curfew by midnight. And yet, you came home at 12:30 once. Nothing happened. So after a while, nothing happens. You just start coming in whenever you want. Years later, you're now 15, and it's been 5 years of this program, and you say, oh, well, I'll just come home at 4:30 in the morning. You come home, and then your parents are waiting for you, and they just crack down. You're grounded for 6 months. This is terrible. And they're just all over you. Okay, now maybe that's kind of a bizarre example, but it does kind of explain what's going to happen that helps answer essential question number 2. The British are going to have this salutary neglect go on for decades. Really for close to a century, but these laws are still in the books, and then eventually, after the French and Indian War, they're going to enforce them tightly and add new ones, and it's going to be like what your experience would be if that happened to you. As a teenager, you'd say, you've never enforced this, and I would never have stayed with this lady if you actually did it, and now you're just dropping the hammer on me. This is totally unfair. Okay, so that is salutary neglect. Now, another thing economically that's going on for the United States, for the American colonies, is triangular trade. And triangular trade is essentially a different idea that is going on, and this is how the rum I mentioned earlier is getting delivered. Essentially, you have kind of a triangle being formed. Rum is traded after it's distilled by New England to the West African countries, who their tribal leaders would sell like countries they defeated. They would sell the losing side into slavery. They become slaves. They're sent, and of course, they just make a contract with some British Empire slave trading company who buys them. So the winners sell the losers into slavery. They get money for that. So these slaves are sent to West Indies. Some of them would be here in sugar plantations or whatever. And then they're going to have some slaves are going to get dropped off in North America, and a lot of molasses is going to be taken up to New England, and then it's distilled into rum and taken back to West Africa. So you see, the products are kind of moving around. Slaves end up all along here. Molasses is going to end up down here and here, although primarily going this way. So you have this triangle of trade of different products going on. That's just one of those things, it's an economic concept you need to know from this. Okay, now getting more into that discontent and why is this colonial angst? Why do they come to resent the British? Essential question 2. Well, again, we talked about the salutary neglect, and then when they're going to start enforcing this, which we'll get to in a minute, that's one. First Great Awakening and the Enlightenment. The First Great Awakening has a huge impact for kind of a religious revival in North America, and you're going to see kind of a rejection of the Anglican Church. It was stronger in the South, but you're going to see more of a rejection of it, more of an embracing of other denominations. And these new denominations that are growing, they don't have that tie to the king who was the head of the Church of England. This is breaking down some of that connection that they have. Also, the Enlightenment. You have these Enlightenment philosophers from Great Britain like Hobbes and Locke that you'll read about, from France like Rousseau and Montesquieu. And they're basically questioning, why do you have kings? Shouldn't you have like a checks and balance style government? Why shouldn't people have the power? Ideas like the social contract, that you're going to get rid of a bad a bad king. So as these ideas circulate through a pretty well-read public, a pretty educated public, because remember, going all the way back to the Puritans, founding the first churches, first colleges, first churches probably too, widespread and very strong as a basis of society, but the first colleges like Harvard College, education was essential to be able to read the Bible for them. So it's a pretty well-read population compared to the lay people, the common people of Europe. And what you're going to see is these ideas circulate around. And so you're having this connection break down. The French Indian War goes on. Now, the American colonists are looking at this saying, well, the Ohio River Valley right here, this is where there's this competition. The British think it's theirs moving out, and they claim it. The French are coming down. There's a lot of fur trading to go on, fur trapping to happen. And it's fertile land that both sides want. So this clash happens starting at Pittsburgh. French Indian War breaks out. And with that breakout, you're going to see essentially at the end of the day, you're going to see the French disappear, okay? And this is going to become British territory. And when that happens, and the French are gone, there's one thing that remains. And this thing that remains is going to be a lot of debt. Okay, so the result is you have an expanded territory, but you also have, after the Treaty of Paris, you have debt that builds up. This is where the British then start to drop the hammer. Salutary neglect is out. They're now going to basically say we need to enforce these laws strictly, we need to add new taxes, we need to pay for this war debt. And the colonists are saying, but this wasn't for us, you're not even letting us settle there. You'll learn about that later on. So the implications of the Treaty of Paris are basically they just feel like they're being mistreated, they don't have representation, and they're saying all these things, this hasn't been enforced in 2 or 3 generations' lifetimes, and you're saying now you're going to do these things to us and it's for our benefit. They don't buy in, and that along with the circulating of First Great Awakening and the Enlightenment ideas leads to this new colonial resentment of the British. That's all the time we have for today. Stay classy, Sam Barlow.